At this time, we get to hear from the great Gahan, Yahweh Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom. Y'all may be seated. Truly an honor to speak before the called out ones of the living Father. As a fellow called out one, I'm honored to be among y'all. Okay, so we're going to have to go really fast this morning, so everybody pay attention. Lately, if you'll notice in the news, they've been pushing sanctions on Iran. And so I'm going to get into some news articles about Iran right now. Barack Obama, this is all these articles, and I had a lot more, occurred within the last week. So just realize how much information is coming out on this right now. But actually 2 days ago it stopped, so there's no more information about it. So it's almost like the calm before the storm. Barack Obama says new sanctions on Iran in weeks. New sanctions to punish Iran for its nuclear weapons program could be in place within weeks, President Obama said yesterday. His remarks hinted at a breakthrough with Russia and China on an issue that has split the UN Security Council for years. The bold forecast came as foreign ministers from the Group of Eight Advanced Economies condemned a nuclear program that they said could only be for building a bomb. And that's the G8. That's the eight most industrialized nations on Earth. A day after Hillary Clinton said that for the first time that China shared its U.S. view that a nuclear-armed Iran is not acceptable. Western negotiations have also made progress on other main obstacle, Russian resistance, based on its commercial and nuclear technology links to Tehran. The U.S.-Russian relationship has grown closer, thanks partly to personal interaction between President Obama and President Medvedev to secure the nuclear arms reduction treaty last Friday. So I guess they're getting closer to peace, true peace, right? They're going to reduce their nuclear arms, right? An Iranian nuclear scientist, now listen, this is pretty important here. An Iranian nuclear scientist who has been missing since June has defected to the United States and is helping the CIA. Shahram Amiri, who disappeared during a pilgrimage to Mecca, defected as part of a long-planned operation. Now, he was in Mecca, which is Saudi Arabia, right? So remember that as we go through these articles. It kind of plays into it. Israel presses China to back Tehran sanctions. So now Israel's also trying to get China on board. It's like they're trying to unite the world against this one country, this one small country. Israel will send its most senior military strategist to China this week to convince Beijing that it's serious about plans to bomb nuclear facilities in Iran if international sanctions fail to curb Tehran's development of atomic weapons. The visit, part of an intense round of diplomacy between China and Israel, follows signs that Beijing will shortly back higher economic sanctions against Iran and the United Nations Security Council. China, which has the power of veto, and so does Russia. The 5 members of the Security Council and the United Nations that have veto power are China and Russia, which they're working on real heavy, and the United States, Britain, and France. Well, United States, Britain, and France are all on board. You don't have to worry about them vetoing anything. They're wanting to go after Iran. It's Russia and China that's the problem. So, who will attend a nuclear security summit he hosted to be hosted by Obama next week in Washington? That's the Chinese president. Diplomatic observers have been astonished at the pace of Israeli diplomacy in China. Last month, General Amos Yadlin, a head of Israeli military intelligence, was dispatched to Beijing with the latest information about Iran's progress towards making a nuclear device, which some experts believe could be achieved later this year. Yadlin was given Netanyahu's personal permission to release Mossad's latest evidence about Iran's progress towards testing nuclear warheads, enriching uranium, and adopting the Shahab missiles to carry nuclear warheads. In a move described as incredibly rare, China sent a general to Tel Aviv last week to inspect the Israeli Air Force strike capabilities, that's the first time I've ever heard of anything like that. The Israeli lobby in Beijing has not gone unnoticed in Tehran. Last week, senior Iranian nuclear negotiator, rushed to Beijing to warn Chinese authorities that stepping up sanctions could cost them dearly. And the reason why they're saying this is because Iran is the second largest supplier of oil to China. Okay? So, the first is Saudi Arabia. So, now with that said, listen to what Saudi Arabia had to say. Saudi Arabia, the biggest supplier of crude oil to China, recently promised to supply all the oil it needs at a cheaper rate than Iran in return for supporting sanctions. So you see how they're kind of ganging up on this one nation, and Saudi Arabia and Iran are bitter enemies. They're two different religious factions that run those countries, and they're more concerned about Iran than led on to be in the American media. Also had an article too that was just astonishing. Kind of goes into what one of the cons was speaking about earlier in the feast. There used to be 88 media companies in America that Americans could get their news from. It's now 6 companies. 6 companies have bought the other 88 companies. So you see how they control the information. When they control the information, they can control people's perception of things, right? So they can manipulate society and opinion, and that's what the beastly system is great at doing. So here's one. China supports Barack Obama's call for new Iran sanctions. So I guess there's another one in here. So I guess by Saudi Arabia offering the oil at a cheaper price than Iran could give it, that got them on board. And also, to sweeten the pot for the Chinese, Geithner delays Chinese currency report. U.S. Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner delayed his scheduled April 15th report to Congress on exchange rate policies, sidestepping the decision on whether to accuse China of manipulating the value of the yen. The delay comes as Chinese President Hu Jintao is scheduled to visit Washington for a nuclear summit on April 12th and 13th. So this is just this next week here. The President of China is coming here. They delayed the vote, the report on the 15th, which is 2 days after he's supposed to come, about devaluing the yen, which is the Chinese currency. So they told them, we'll just keep your monetary, your dollar propped up, your yen propped up, and you'll be able to get the oil cheaper as long as you go along with us. And the reason why Russia is having trouble with I don't think Russia's going to be a problem anymore either. Unless like 3 weeks ago, a month ago, they said that they would go along with sanctions too. And this is why. A Chechen militant leader claimed responsibility last night for sending Black Widow suicide bombers into the Moscow metro. Said that he personally ordered the attacks. I guess the leader, who is a self-proclaimed Islamist emirate. Okay, so he's saying he's Islamist now. Remember that. The G8 ministers call for strong steps over Iran's nuclear activity. Okay, so that was what we'd spoken about earlier. Some interesting thing. Now, Obama warns of Iran threat to world economy. Okay, so you see how they're pushing it. Like I said, this stopped two days ago. It's like all information stopped. It was like they kept just pushing, and then they stopped. So it says, game changer, the U.S. nuclear shield for Saudis, Gulf Emirates. This is a great article. Listen to this. The U.S. test-fired a submarine-launched ballistic Trident missile capable of carrying nuclear warheads from Saudi territory during a joint military exercise last week, a Western military official reported late Wednesday, March 31st, so just 7 days ago. U.S. defense spokesman denied the launch, but Saudi security sources stand by the report. And I have more information. It says that military sources report this was the first time in Middle East military history that a nuclear-capable missile was fired from the oil kingdom toward the Persian Gulf and Iranian shores. It came. So you see how they're really putting the pressure on Iran. They're even firing missiles at it from right across the Indian Ocean. It came in response to Saudi and Gulf Arab concerns over America's failure to halt Iran's evolving nuclear weapons program. The official did not reveal the location of the test, type of submarine used, or whether it was successful. Said Saudi Arabia does not have the units or radar systems for operating multi-headed ballistic missiles. The drill brought the Trident close to the Iranian coastline. So they probably thought that was it, that they were going to get hit, because they're firing nuclear-capable missiles. And they don't know that it didn't have a nuke on board, you know. They just see a missile coming at their country. This demonstration by the Obama administration aimed at showing the Saudi and Gulf Arab rulers that they are now protected by the American nuclear umbrella against an Iranian nuclear attack. Saudi Deputy Minister Prince Sultan said Saudi and U.S. warplanes will carry out joint exercises soon. U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates visited the kingdom to tell officials that the Obama administration's effort for diplomatic engagement with Iran had come to naught, and had asked for the influential kingdom's help to win wide backing for economic penalties against Iran over its nuclear program. Gates also discussed bolstering Saudi air missile defense capabilities. And look at this. They said they have which they have bought billions of dollars worth of American weapons, including missile defense hardware. Iran, now in the face of all this, what does Iran say? What is their response? Iran intends to build more uranium enrichment plants. They're like, yeah, okay, well, whatever you say. Ahmadinejad warns Israel over Gaza attacks, and Iran buys uranium enrichment hardware, right? So they're not deterred. And Turkey and Brazil have now backed Iran. They said they'll go with them. Iran also supplies arms to Hezbollah north of Israel, to Hamas in the southwest of Israel. Syria and Iran have thrown in together. They're pledged allegiance to one another. And then here's another one. Iran says it will not stop its nuclear program. So after all that information, all that pressing, they won't stop. And now here's another one. U.S. official says intelligence suggests Iran plans to ship arms to the Taliban. So now they're accusing Iran of supplying weapons on the other side of on the northeastern part of Iran. So you see how they already got Iran surrounded. We're in Afghanistan, Iraq. That's the east and the west. We're in Pakistan. That's like the southwest, the southeast. So they already got them surrounded. Now they got Russia on board from the north, and then they got this huge military. The United States has 18,169 jets, 1,559 naval vessels. Iran only has 65 naval vessels and 84 jets. So you can see the lopsidedness of this and what they're planning on doing to Iran. And you remember in Yeremiah, here we can write these scriptures down real quick. I have to wrap it up real fast. Yeremiah chapter 49, 35 through 37 states that Iran, prophecies for believers, Iran is going to be destroyed. Why the things were held back for our benefit, for us to be honored by testing from Yahweh. Remember in Zechariah 5, the spokesman of the two witnesses, he magnifies and extols the ephah, which are the laws of Yahweh. And when you ask at Abel, and you don't accept the answer that Abel gives you, brethren, I fear that you're going to lose your salvation. But you can humble yourself and come and receive salvation. Remember, we were all called into the work, right? We're all fellow called out ones. He was sent. He was not called. He is the original one sent. We're called, he's sent. You can't teach the one sent anything, right? Here, write these scriptures down real quick, too. I want to tell you. Deuteronomy 28, verses 1 and 2, and Exodus 19, verses 5 and 6. And that's about the voice of Yahweh. We all know who that is. And in Leviticus 20, verse 26, and Exodus 25, verse 40. And that's the work that the voice of Yahweh is doing. Remember, Yeshua said he sent his Malach, Yisrayl Hawkins, the high priest of the house of Yahweh, sent Yisrayl Hawkins to teach us Yahweh's way. Don't ever forget that. You never teach Yisrayl Hawkins anything. He teaches us what Yahweh wants us to know. So if you all please stand, I have the honor and the privilege to present to you the great Kahan Gedalia Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom. Now be seated. Now we're going to have to continue on warp speed here. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'll give you a speed course in the Bible codes, and then we're going to explain the code that we did here. Okay. Okay. This is a sentence. Okay. Rips. Eliyahu Rips was the man who did the Bible codes. He didn't invent it, but he explored it years ago with the computer. So Rips explained that each code is a case of adding every 5th or 10th or 50th or whatever letter to form a word. So you take that very sentence there and it gets a little bit difficult sometimes. Where is it? So now let's read the same sentence as a 4-letter skip code, okay? So we have the same sentence here, but every 4th letter he skips. See, so Rips explains R-E-A-D. Notice that bold letter up there? And it goes on through to the very end. He says, so what he says now is read the code. So that first sentence, translate with the 4 skip to read the code. Okay? So that's how it's done in a nutshell. The ELS reference, ELS means the equal letter sequence. It has to be equal, okay? Is 6,170 letters. So what we have here, this, by the way, is on Barack Obama, okay? See his name in the middle here? Barack Obama, going up just like this. Now, between each of these letters is 6,170 characters, okay? And after the computer goes through, and it goes through, it tries 1 skip, 2 skips, 3 skip, all the way up to 6,170, and finally, they found the name, Barack Obama. So what the computer does, it rearranges the rows so that it won't be going across like this, it goes up like this. This is the main code. Okay, and after that now, the computer will fit in all the other words that we have in the matrix around that main code. Understand? Okay. So, there are 12 displayed terms in this matrix. The matrix starts at Jeremiah 46, verse 10, and it ends at Hadassah, chapter 9, verse 22. The matrix spans 320,906 characters at the surface text. The matrix has 46 rows. That's this. It's measuring like this now. And 66 columns wide and contains a total of 3,498 characters. There are 10 significant terms in the matrix. And the odds are 1 chance in 23,880 the significance, the spirit in favor of the significance, okay? So, what we'd like to do now is just to go through this matrix a little bit. What we did was, first of all, you decide what you want, which name you want, and what you want to put in the matrix. So, we decided to see how did Barack Obama relate to the 4 horses of Revelation. Okay? So, we have, first of all, the white horse, which is given to us in Revelation 6, verse 2. it says, "And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and the crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. And when he had opened the second seal, I heard the second creature say, 'Come and see.'" Okay? So, we have up here in the upper right-hand corner of this, the white horse. White, and there's a word for horse down here which it ties into. Okay? So now remember, we're not in Revelation now. We're in this case, Jeremiah. Okay? So it's the word for white horse is encoded in Jeremiah. Now, and the red horse likewise is coded in. Okay, the red horse is at the bottom. I'll just tell you where they are. The pale horse is a little ways up, and the black horse is, well, the black horse is right there. See, that's the black horse right there. Okay? Now, that's where the horses are located. And also in Matthew 6 verse 24 verses 6 to 7, he talks about the wars, okay? Matthew 24. Verses 6 and 7. "And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars." We have their war in here. "See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines." Famines is in here. "And pestilences." Disease is in here. Epidemics. "And earthquakes is in here, in place after place." Okay, so all right, so that's all in here now. But like I said, it's encoded in other scriptures in the book of Yahweh, not in the scriptures that they're mentioned. So let's go through and see where they're coded. Okay, we start off with the white horse, which was in Revelation 6 verse 1. Here it appears coded in Jeremiah 46 verses 10. Okay, so let's see what Jeremiah 6 says. I'm probably going to have to just give you some of these, let you read it later. Jeremiah 6:46. Yeah. Jeremiah 46, verses 10. That's where it's encoded, the white horse, okay? And the way we get these scriptures is, see, these are all scriptures going across here. And the computer, when you double-click with your mouse, up pops the scripture. That's underneath, all right? So that's what we do here for this case in the white horse. All four letters are encoded in Jeremiah 46 and verse 10. And let's read it. It says, "For this is a day of Father Yahweh of hosts, a day of vengeance, that he may avenge himself on his adversaries. The sword will devour, and he will be satiated and made drunk with their blood. For Father Yahweh of hosts has a sacrifice in the north country by the river Euphrates." Okay? So it matches up with Revelation. Okay? And the second word for black horse is right here. The black is right here, if you can see it. Okay? That's word black. Going across Barack Obama right here. And that black horse is encoded in Psalm 86. Psalm 86. So you can write Psalm 86 in your notes. It says, "There is none like you among the gods, O Yahweh. There are no works like your works. All the nations which you have made will come and worship in front of you, O Yahweh, and glorify your name. Okay? And as we're going down, I'm just going to give you the scriptures now. That was the black horse. Now the pale horse you can find in Proverbs 5 verse 22. The wicked man is entrapped by his own iniquities. He is caught in the ropes of his own sin. Remember what we're looking at here now. We're looking at the four horses of Revelation, and we're looking at all the things that's going to unfold in this end time. By the way, the word for end time is here also. The letters for the red horse you'll find in Proverbs 20 verse 18. And actually, that's the one I wanted to read to you. Proverbs 20 verse 18. It's the last one I'll read to you. Proverbs 20 verse 18 says, every purpose is established by counsel, but only with sound advice wage war. Okay? And the red horse is encoded in Hadassah 9 verse 22. The word war appears in Proverbs 20 verse 18. I just read that. And the letters in the word for the end, it appears in the Song of Songs, chapter 2, verses 13 and 14. See, the end is down here towards the end, okay? The end, all right. So just going to give you some scriptures now for you to copy down because... okay, Barack Obama, his entire name is encoded in the Psalms. I don't know what that means, but here are the words. And it's beginning from bottom. Barack Obama goes like this. Okay? The first letter is Psalm 106 verse 44. The second letter is 98.1, Psalms 98.1. The third letter is Psalms 86.9. The fourth letter is Psalms 76.6. The fifth letter is Psalm 68 verse 11. The next letter is Psalms 55 verse 4. Next letter is 42 verse 5. Psalm 42 verse 5. And finally, Psalms 33 verse 8. Okay? So, I want to leave you with that. Get out of the way here. It gives me great pleasure this morning to introduce to you our great and awesome teacher, Kahan Yisrayl Hawkins. Shalom, everyone. Praise Yahweh. You may be seated. And thanks for your praise to Yahweh. Still on the last day too, and it sounded as great as it did the first day. I'm so thankful to the two elders that spoke before me because it saves me a lot of time. And Yahweh gives us reminders all through the Holy Scriptures, and He tells us to take advantage of them, to keep in mind certain things. Like He set certain things in front of His throne to remind Him daily, like the 7-lamp lampstand that is in the western light that's sitting there right now as a reminder to Him. A few days back, we started on a subject called deception, and of course, we see little deceptions get started. Somebody will get on a word that they don't know, and they'll let it trap their mind, and they forget about the total plan of Yahweh. They forget about the priest. They just get hung up on a word. And of course, whether it fits in with the plan or whether it
coincides with the rest of the words before or behind. They don't know because they haven't studied enough, and Yahweh is not inspiring them, of course. So they get hung up and they get deceived. And we're told to avoid arguments and over words and phrases and so forth. And so, because you can't win, nobody can win an argument. They have something in their mind. You have something in your mind, and of course, what is said is not even heard half the time by either party. Anyway, I said I would bring the information on deception and show why we don't butcher lambs on for Yahshua anymore. That Yahshua is our Passover lamb, and that's shown in both Book 1 and Book 2. Now, I haven't covered that completely, but I brought out enough that everyone should know why already, and probably you missed it because maybe something distracted you. But you can't just bring out one little point. You've got to bring the whole subject on this to understand what Yahweh was even doing, why He even had them sacrifice a lamb or a goat or a sheep in Goshen, and for that one particular night, and why He had the Levitical priesthood then was established later on. See, all of these things come into play with it, and unless you understand the full Scripture, the total book of Yahweh, as Yahweh said He would inspire me to understand, and He promises you that, then you'll get hung up. I brought a sermon on deception once before, just one sermon, showing you deception and how everyone in the world could be deceived except the elect. Except the elect. You need to get that sermon and listen to it again, and then believe Yahweh. Believe Yahweh and believe the one sent. But I want you to read that building down there before you leave, and let it go into your mind, and this will remind you, if you'll try to remember it, it will remind you to overcome and look forward to the test, not dread them, not dread. Yahweh knows what you need, and to bring you to finish perfecting you, as he did the saints of old, the holy women and the holy men of old. So He knows what you need, so look forward to these tests and look forward to proving yourself. And then come Pentecost. It may not last that long. If you paid attention to the information that the great Kohan Nearia was bringing out, you'll see that the nations are lining up as the prophecies show. And the main thing to remember on the great Kohan Gedaliah's information there, the thing that I want you to remember is that Barack Obama is shown with this quartet, the white horse, which is the Catholic Church, which is now being exposed by the House of Yahweh and within the Vatican itself. We've been bringing it from the Holy Scriptures, what this group represents, what they teach, what their activities are, the gods that they worship. They don't worship Yahweh. They don't want anything to do with Yahweh. They don't want anything to do with His laws. They don't keep the laws of Yahweh. They don't want to. They don't claim to. They worship gods, and of course they really think that the gods are going to overpower Yahweh somewhere or another. I can tell you for sure that the gods cannot do it, because if they could, they would have already done so, because they hate Yahweh. They're the adversaries of Yahweh, and they would have killed Him if they could have by now. They're all murderers. They're all rapists. They're all so sick in their minds, and you can see it in the people that represent them on earth. Well, come Pentecost, if it lasts that long, it may not last that long, If you keep these things that you've learned here in your mind and the laws, and you go through the test that Yahweh wants you to prove to Him that you can do it, and this will be written in your honor, then come Pentecost, you will have accepted Yahweh's plan totally, and accepted His laws, His prophecies. It all goes together now. The prophecies actually explain the laws and what's going to take place in each time era. So you will be willing to accept those prophecies and His laws and the one sent, maybe, by Pentecost. Yahweh willing. Others have. And I know we can too if we'll just set our minds to do so. Now, in this subject on deception, it didn't start, it started with Satan way back in Genesis. And Satan was great about deceiving. She was very subtle. She'd bring up one word or something like this, and then she'd twist it, or scriptures like she did with Yahshua. She even quoted scriptures with Yahshua, and Yahshua just quoted her another scripture and went on. They so wanted Yahshua in their secret councils, their secret religions, because the man had a lot of authority, and they knew it. He had a lot of power. He had a lot of pull among the people, so they wanted him badly and offered him all the kingdoms of the world. He could have been king at that time over all the kingdoms of the world, but he chose Yahweh's kingdom and the suffering that goes with it over, just like the prophet Moshe did. Moshe, he could have been high in ranks in Egypt too, but he chose not to. He chose to go ahead and suffer, like Yahweh said would bring him to perfection. Of course, establish the kingdom that Yahweh wanted to establish for a short time here on earth. If you remember now, the Catholic priests, they were called Pharisees at one time. Before they accepted the name Pharisees, which means universal, we see these same Catholic priests back in Samuel's day, in Samuel the 8th chapter, 1 Samuel the 8th chapter, and they come and say, we don't want Yahweh reigning over us anymore. And Yahweh said, let them have their way, because it was in His plan. He knew this is what they were going to do. He said, let them have their way, let them have a king. And of course, we will, the prophecies then of scattering them out into the world would take place, because they would start fighting each other, and of course many of them would leave the land and go to another land and park and start a kingdom of their own. And this is what took place all over that eastern part of the world there, that Yahweh calls the fourth part of the earth at this time, and is referred to in Revelations along with, as the hidden code, the Bible codes show, along with Barack Obama now and the end right now. So you see how close we're getting here with the scriptures and the hidden codes. So the Catholics now, that means universal. Well, this, if you'll get everything that I say, try to concentrate on what I'm saying. Don't hate me. Get your mind off of hatred and try to concentrate on everything I say here, because I'm going to bring a bunch of this. I'm going to have to skip a bunch, but I'm going to bring a bunch of it into your mind right now and show you the ones that was reigning then, they're still reigning now, and they got their setups all over the world. They got their claws or their tentacles into every nation now. And including Israel, including the United States. The article was handed to me this morning that I didn't have time to read it, but it's talking about the Vatican could actually annul any law in the United States, that they have that power right now. And I believe it from what the Scripture says also. But now in taking over the temple, as the Pharisees did. These were the same priests now that in in 1 Samuel, the 8th chapter, they were the same priests that came to Samuel and said, "We want a king." Now, they didn't say, "We're leaving the house of Yahweh," or anything like that. They just said, "We want a king to reign over us." And of course, from there now, after the temple was built, they actually, through violent men, Yeshua said, took over the temple. And they did as they pleased in that temple. And as Jeremiah showed, and also the Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings showed, they brought in Easter, they brought in Christmas. Jeremiah showed this too. But even back in Samuel's day now, they brought all of this in. And of course, this was the religion that they started bringing into the people. And the people loved it. They made money from it. And some made more money than others. The others that didn't make money, they had fun chasing Easter eggs, chasing the rabbits that laid the Easter eggs. And of course, they thought it was joyful. They thought that this would bring them joy in receiving gifts on Christmas, especially when you place it under a green tree and pretend that Santa Claus put it there. Well, all of these things were thrills. They're worthless thrills, but they're thrills to the untrained mind. The untrained mind is you can't look behind it and see what is behind it. And of course, that's what the world is today. That's what you call deception. Deception was brought about so subtly and over the period of years, and of course, the crusades that they had, the crusades were invented to get rid of people like me. Joan of Arc and others that actually taught any of the laws of Yahweh, any holiness. They would start with exposing the Catholic Church. Normally it would come from someone who was raped by one of the priests, a young man, and of course they would arrest these people. And the Crusades were for that reason, to go out and arrest these people that were making accusations against the Catholic Church, because this has gone on. This was in your Bible way back when. They were sodomites. and of course, Yahweh set forth and destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah as an example of what's going to take place with this hellacious burning that they're bringing upon themselves by nuclear war. He's just going to allow them to destroy themselves with nuclear activity. Well, the rain of fire and brimstone down upon those two cities is showing you the last acts of this wicked system. And it described as wicked, evil in the Holy Scripture. They spread out through the land. They formed colonies. They formed nations. They were unbelievers. And of course, an unbeliever is called a Gentile. Well, they took that and the word race, and they made you think that mankind was two different creations of people. We had the righteous creation and the unrighteous creation. But Yahweh said, no, from this group comes profaneness to all the land. From the 12 tribes. And you got to believe that and remember it, and then you'll start making sense out of this whole thing. But the sodomite, if you look up the word sodomite, it's Kodash. Kodash means holy. Now they took their activities and they started calling their evil or sin, they started calling it holiness. And this, one of the goddesses, Wicca, and that's her name, but she gave her priest certain rights, and those rights were, of course, pedophilia. That's the raping of children, and of course this started taking place with the monks. Monks are those, who go off and stay with other men. The monks and all of his monkeys, and all the other monkeys that wanted to join them. And of course, they did evil things with one another. As the scripture shows, fulfilling their lust, their rights that was given to them by, of course, this god Wiki. That was just one, or goddess. But the word, they took things unholy, and they called them holy. They described them as being holy. Sodomite. If you look up the word, it means kadosh, or that's what they placed upon that word sodomite. The word kadosh, of course, is holy. That comes from Yahweh. And the root to be pronounced, of course, or observed is clean. Clean. Now, surely I don't have to go back, well, maybe we should go back to Leviticus 11. Leviticus 11, and Yahweh shows you what is clean and what is unclean. If you read this right here, you'll see that rabbits are unclean. Is everybody with me? Pork is unclean, not to be eaten or touched when they're dead. Certain fish are created to clean up the bottom of the waters, the bottom of the lakes or the bottom of the sea. Crawfish and shrimp and things like this, they're unclean to you. They have things in their body, microorganisms, some of them called E. coli. That's not the only thing they're called, but some of it is, that can kill you if you get a large enough dose of it. Well, they have things that are clean here. If you go to Leviticus 18 now, Leviticus 18, you will see acts here that if you do them, of course, it spreads. It creates what we call STDs today. And these STDs are a mixture of man, monkey, birds, animals. Some clean animals have certain things in their private parts that you don't want in your body. Certain things to keep that animal clean. And of course, we're to take that certain parts and throw it away. We're not to mix it in our body in any way. These are the things that make you unclean. But kadosh means clean. That's one of the meanings of it. Everyone needs to familiarize themselves with this right here. One of them is sodomy. One of the things that Yahweh says to avoid, it confuses the mind. It brings microorganisms into your mind that shouldn't be there at all. And of course, he says it defiles you, it defiles the land, it defiles the air you breathe and the water you drink. Well, now, if you notice what was brought yesterday, the animals, even the clean animals on earth now, they're being defiled. They are actually being defiled, and of course, there's no such thing as a animal without spot or blemish on the face of the earth. On the face of the earth. Do you get that? Now, I brought that out before. That right there should show you why one of them can't be sacrificed as Yeshua today. There are no clean animals. We have worked for years to clean up animals, and we haven't done it yet. And as you saw the veterinarian, where they repeated it over and over, there's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing we can do about it. Yes, the world knows this. But they call it kadosh when they eat these unclean things. Turn over with me to Isaiah now, the chapter 65. Isaiah fought this. He said in Isaiah 24, you have changed the laws, broken the everlasting covenant, and because of this, the earth is defiled. And it will have to be actually burned to be cleaned up. That's what Yahweh is telling us. At the best we can do is try to keep them out of your body when you're eating them. The parasites I'm talking about, try to keep them out. If you noticed what the veterinarians say, no, we can't get rid of them. About the only thing we can do is kill them out of the stomach, because there's where they do the most damage. And their stomach, listen to me, everyone now, pay attention. The stomach starts swelling up. You'll notice the animal sick. Now you can kill them out of the stomach will go down, the holes in it will heal up, and the animal looks like he's well again. He looks like he's free of parasites, but he's not. He's not free of the eggs or the parasite. So these parasites then, you can't get rid of them. You can only kill them out of the stomach to keep it from killing the animal until you get it ready to butcher. That's the best you can do today that we have found so far. If we had a way of nuking our land here, then we could clean it. But then you got the radioactive activity that's going to take place after that. I'm thinking Yahweh has another way, possibly, of cleaning this activity, but where we're going to actually save 2 billion people and feed 2 billion people, that he hasn't showed anyone yet, and the earth will be clean, or much cleaner than it is, the way it is. Well, sanctify. Let's read this first, though. Here, the word sanctify. Let's go to Exodus 20. Exodus 20, and Yahweh shows you here what kadosh is, what it means. And he said, his Sabbaths, if you keep his Sabbaths, verse 10, Exodus 20 and verse 10, the seventh day is the Sabbath. Now, Exodus 31:13, Yahweh tells us here, my Sabbaths you shall keep, for they are a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am Yahweh who sanctifies you. Who sanctifies you. Well, if you go on over here now, you find this other group that refuse to keep the laws of Yahweh, and they're in action at this time, and they're taking over the temple, taking over everything that Yahweh created under Moshe, and he says they are those that sanctify themselves. They're sanctifying themselves. They're calling holy or kadosh what is actually unholy, the unholy acts that they're doing. He says in verse, he said a nation, the last part of verse 1, a nation that was called by my name. I have spread out my hands all day to a rebellious people, speaking of these priests now, who walked in the ways which is not right, after their own thoughts, a people who provoke me to judgments continually to my face, who sacrifice in gardens. Yes, they do sacrificing, but not to Yahweh. The priest who did sacrificing to Yahweh, they actually had to be kadosh. They actually had to be holy. They had to be without sin. They had to be clean. The altar they sacrificed on had to be the same way. And Yahweh told them how to cleanse the altar. They had to spend 7 days cleansing the altar. Get that? That was part of that law. They had to spend 7 days cleansing the altar before they could put anything holy up on the altar. The altar had to be holy. Did any of that enter anyone's mind who was wanting to do this? Who only had 4 days and didn't even have an altar? No. No. Everything has to be known or deception will creep in. And it must be practiced as Yahweh says to, or you pronounce a death penalty upon yourself. But here he says they sanctify themselves. Let's see, they sacrifice in the gardens and burn incense, verse 3, on altars of brick, who assemble and spend nights keeping memorials to the dead. Now this is Halloween, or Saints' Day, as they call it. And they had so many saints, the Catholic Church did at one time, pedophiliacs. They had so many of them, they called holy. They called them saints. All of these. And they said, this is a holy act that you're doing. And you've got to do this. And one of the gods said you've got to do it in 3 different ways at once. You know, it was a sickening thing to just read about what these gods teach in the Catholic Church. But they are teaching it in the Catholic Church. It was admitted and told about by Malachi Martin before he was killed, or before he suddenly died somewhere or another. Memorials to the dead, also eating swine's flesh. In Leviticus 11, it says swine's flesh is unclean. Don't touch it. Don't touch it when it's dead. You know, one of the things I've always hated, and this is what the people are raving about now in the world, they know that swine now is unclean. Many of them do. And they see the grocery stores putting it in the same cage with with their fish that they like, and their chicken that they like, and their beef and so forth. So, and they don't bother to wash their hands or anything when they go from the pork to the other. So everything is defiled, as Isaiah 24 said it would be. Well, they eat swine's flesh. The Catholic Church says, yes, it's okay to eat swine's flesh. It's okay to eat the rodent, you know, the big rat. If there's meat on it, eat it. Eat swine's flesh and the broth of abominable things, unclean foods in their vessels, who say, stand by yourself, do not come near me. I'm a separatist. Separatist, that's Pharisee. Don't come near me. I've got to separate from you. I'm holy. I'm Kadash. Well, what they're calling holy is the unholy that Yahweh tells you is unholy. Unclean. I'm holier than you. These are a smoke in my nostrils, a fire that burns all day. Look on down to verse 7. Your iniquities and the iniquities of your fathers together, says Yahweh. Who is he speaking to? The 12 tribes of Israel, brother. The 12 tribes of Israel that rejected Yahweh in 1 Samuel, the 8th chapter, who have burned incense upon the mountains and blasphemed my name upon the hills, that is, in the uplifted places. Therefore, I will measure their former works into their bosom. Look on over to verse 11, shows they follow after that troop that was prophesied in Genesis that they would, troop of demons. In Isaiah 66 now, he says, for behold, Yahweh will come with fire, verse 15, with his chariots like a whirlwind to render his anger with fury and his rebuke with flames of fire. That is judgment. It's not that Yahweh is angry by any means. He's allowing this to take place, he says. For by fire and by sword will Yahweh plead with all flesh, and the slain of Yahweh will be many. That is, he's going to allow them to die, kill themselves with nuclear war. Look at verse 17. They who sanctify themselves. Remember how you are sanctified by Yahweh? By keeping what you're doing here today. Yahweh's appointed feast days, his Sabbaths. Praise Yahweh. And that sets you apart as belonging to Yahweh. But these sanctify themselves and purify themselves in the gardens. Yes, they are religious people. But the problem is they're calling things that are unholy, they're calling it holy. Everything that is filthy and unclean, they call holy. And then they take Kepha's writings when he let down the unclean animals in the vision that was let down to him of all these unclean animals. And Kepha says, don't offer that to me. I've never let anything like that touch my lips, ever. And they take that and they say, well, what Jesus has made clean, don't call it unclean. So see, this same thing that they're taking right here, they're trying to twist the words of the apostles. And the apostles said, touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. But they say, all of it's clean now. And they were saying it long before Kepha, but they blame Kepha for permitting it into the church. And they say, well, from Kepha's words on that date, we were allowed to eat pork and all the rodents and anything that walks or crawls or that we can see or smell. But here they were doing it already, and the prophets were saying, what you're doing is wrong. They were sanctifying themselves, not letting Yahweh, who eats swine's flesh, that which is offered to gods, and the rodent, that's a Catholic Church actually forecast that the rodent was clean to eat, so go ahead and eat it, will be consumed together in this fiery judgment that is coming, called nuclear war, of which the quartet is shown in prophecy in Revelation 6. Barack Obama is shown along with this quartet and these four horses that we see here. In Exodus 22, we see the word holy here used. Exodus 22, and notice verse 31. Exodus 22:31, he says, and you are to be my holy people. Neither shall you eat the meat of an animal torn by wild beasts, but you're to be holy people. And of course he says, be holy as I am holy, not holy as the Pharisees and the Catholics are holy. The Catholics are not holy. They're the furthest thing from being holy. Look at Exodus 29, but they call evil holy. In Exodus 29 and verse 37, Exodus 29 verse 37, he says, 7 days you shall make atonement for the altar. Now this is the cleanliness of the priests that he taught to do these things. 7 days you shall make atonement for the altar and sanctify it. And the altar shall be most holy, and whatever touches the altar must be holy. Now this is the priesthood that he set up to offer the sacrifices. By the time they got down to Yeshua showed what they were with a woman that they drugged to him, saying, we caught this woman in the very act. Now Moshe said to stone her. He said, sure, just let the one who is without sin first cast the stone. That was the law for the priesthood. They had to be without sin. They had to be without sin to offer any offering. In Leviticus 6, verse 18, Leviticus 6 and verse 18, we see another thing here taking place. I'm going the wrong way. Leviticus 6, verse 18. He says, all the males among the children of Aaron may eat it. This is a statute forever in your generations concerning the offerings made by fire to Yahweh. Everyone who touches them must be holy. Now this is a training that they went through, and they went through it for months before they were ever actually. Let's turn over to the 2 Chronicles. We'll get one more here, and then we'll go on further then. Second Chronicles 29 and verse 5. 2 Chronicles 29, verse 5. And said to them, listen to me, Levites, consecrate and sanctify yourselves now, and consecrate and sanctify the house of Yahweh. You know, if you would study what this actually means, they had to come out from the world. They couldn't be driving around. They had to be separate from people who didn't even believe, who didn't believe the Scriptures. They had to be separate from Jews, which was called Gentiles, because they were unbelievers. There was many unbelievers. That's the reason they polluted the Sabbath, as Hebrews 4 shows you. Hebrews 4 in book 2. It shows you they were unbelievers. Well, remember now Samuel, 1 Samuel 8. Maybe we should go to it and read it. 1 Samuel 8, and rehearse it in your minds here. Samuel's Kings. 1 Samuel, the 8th chapter. Found on page 228. Here you see, before you get to that, if you look back here to chapter 7, you see Easter being celebrated here, and you see the people. Now this was occurring here in 1140 BCE. Everybody got your place there? 227. Page 227. Chapter 7, 1 Samuel. They were these priests that had already turned against Samuel. They were bringing into the house of Yahweh, even at that time, Easter, Halloween, the eating of unclean food, is what we saw in Isaiah 65 and 66. Here in verse 3, we see Ashtaroth, that is the goddess that the Catholic Church worships today, Easter goddess. So in verse 4, so that the children of Israel put away the Baal Lord, that's the Lord that they worship today, changed the name from Yahweh, as Jeremiah 23:26 says. They had it back then. The gods, Elohim, that's what they call, that's what the Zionist movement calls, which are what's left over of the Pharisees, which are all Catholics, by the way, according to the news media, news articles coming forth from the Vatican and the hidden archives. Elohim and Ashtaroth, the goddess, Ishtarta, that is Easter, and worship and serve Yahweh. They were in trouble. They were being defeated by the Philistines, if you're not familiar with this history here. And Samuel says to them, if you want to put all these things away, and then notice verse 6, then so they confessed their sins against Yahweh, and Samuel judged Israel at that time. This was 1140, if you want to write that down, 1140 BCE. Now, you come on down just a few short years, at 1112, about 38 years, and you see again, they come to him and say, we don't want to serve Yahweh anymore. Well, the history shows that yes, Yahweh did defeat the Philistines for them and put them back in their offices again. And then here, just 38 years later now, we see the same thing taking place, and it winds up in Isaiah that got the temple defiled, they got everything defiled, they're sanctifying themselves and calling everything that is unholy, they're calling it holy, or Kadosh. In Jeremiah 23 now, let's go. Jeremiah was the prophet, the next prophet to start Isaiah, after Isaiah, to start scolding and warning this Catholic Church, who were called priests at that time, called priests of Yahweh, and is blaspheming the name because they weren't holy. They were polluting his Sabbaths. And here in Jeremiah, he says, the saying of Jeremiah, son of Hilkiah, of the priestly family, that lived in Ashtaroth, in the land of Benjamin, to whom the word of Yahweh came in the days of Josiah, son of Amon, king of Judah. King of Judah now. Get that. In the 13th year of his reign, the word of Yahweh came in the days of Joachim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, until the end of the 11th year of Zedekiah. Look on down to verse 5 now. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you before you were born. I sanctified you, and I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. The nations of Israel. Yes, there were several nations of Israel that had formed at that time. In fact, Asia was taken over by them. Babylon was taken over by them. And they had their own religion going. The same thing as teaching today, it was teaching then. And also in Rome. Rome was controlled by a huge Pharisaic army. The Apostle Shaul was one of them. Shaul was a Pharisee. He was also a Roman soldier. He was also a citizen of Rome and had never been there. That should show you right there, the prophet of the nations that he is talking about here. Now look at verse 6. And he said, Yahweh, my Father, behold, I cannot speak. I'm only a youth. Well, verse 10 now. Skip on down to verse 10. He says, see, this day I've set you over the nations and over the kingdoms, to root out and to pull down, to destroy and to throw down, to build and to plant. Now all these things, of course, is going to be done, and this is a prophecy that's going to be done by someone that Jeremiah actually prophesies of, which is called a branch and a protected place and all of that in Abelin or Abelin. Praise Yahweh. Moreover, the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, Jeremiah, what do you see? And then he sees the olive branch and the almond tree. The almond tree, which means he's watching over his plan. Look at verse 13. In the last part, he says, I see a boiling pot, and it is facing away from the north. Then Yahweh said to me, from the north, evil will be loosed upon the inhabitants of the land. That is Israel. Verse 15 now. For behold, I will call all the families of the kingdoms of the north, says Yahweh. They will come, and each one will set his throne. These are all the 12 tribes of Israel, by the way. They're not other nations from Pluto or whatever you want to call them, another race or anything like that, at the entrance of the gates of Jerusalem against all its walls, fighting against one another, just as Israel and Judah fought against each other. Turn on over to verse chapter 23 now. Chapter 23. Chapter 23. Let's start with verse 1. He says, woe to the pastors who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture. Scatter, yes, they're scattered out to other lands where they built kingdoms, they built nations. Remember, Ephraim and Manasseh, they became a multitude of nations, Yahweh said. Not just the one nation in Israel, but a multitude of nations. They fought each other, they scattered out, they were strong people, they became stronger people. Rome was the biggest army at that time, but there was others formed besides that actually defeated Rome in many different places. But they were driven away. You have scattered my flock and driven them away, he said. Now look at verse, let's continue reading, we'll just skip down. But I will gather the remnant of my flock out of all the countries where I have driven them, a remnant. I will gather a remnant out. Verse 5 says, behold, the day is come, says Yahweh, that I will raise to David. Now this is a prophecy in the future. I'm going to raise to David a branch. You need to get those sermons. If you didn't get those, you need to get them. It's very important that you have this information and know who the branch is. And all the prophecies, starting at Genesis, that prophesy of you sitting here in this building in the last days, in this time period. I will raise to David a righteous branch, and a king will reign and succeed and will execute judgment and justice. That king, of course, is our high priest and king, Yeshua Messiah, who was prophesied to die on a stake, then set at the right hand of Yahweh, and Hebrews said he is now our high priest and king. In his day, in the days of this branch, Yada will be saved, and Israel will dwell safely. So we see that is going to come to pass in this time period, brother. Along with, yes, if you look at verse 8, and they will say, as surely as Yahweh lives, who brought up and led the seed of the house of Israel out of the protected place from all countries where he had driven them, and they will dwell in their own land. To the protected place. There's a correction, if I can find that quickly, and hopefully it's on top. 23 verse 8, yes. In 23 verse 8, but they will say, as surely as Yahweh lives, who brought up and led the seed of the house of Israel out of the protected place. The word out of here, out of the protected place, that is written in Jeremiah 23 verse 8, translated from the Hebrew word preposition ma. This word is listed on page 578 of a Hebrew and English lexicon of the Old Testament by Brown and Driver and Braggs, which shows the word means even to, who led them even to the protected place, not away from or out of, but to it, and corrected. But they will say, as surely as Yahweh lives, who brought up and led the seed of the house of Israel even to the protected place, and from all countries where they had been driven, they will dwell in their land safely. Well, that time is coming very shortly now. They're not dwelling there safely now, but they will be. Now that's verse 8. Look at verse 10. For the land is full of adulterers. This is a time period when Israel should have been holy, but they were calling everything that was unholy, they were calling it holy and practicing it at that time. Because of this curse, the land mourns, and the pleasant places of the wilderness are dried up. Their conduct is evil, whose might is not right. For both prophet and priest are profane. Get the word, profane. Yes, even in my own house. See, they'd taken over, as Yeshua said. The violent people had taken over the house of Yahweh. And Yahweh said they were bringing pork, they were bringing Easter worship, Christmas worship, Halloween worship, the things that they're doing right now. I have found their wickedness, says Yahweh, in his own house, he said. Going down to verse 13. I have seen folly, offense in the prophets of Samaria. They prophesied in Baal, by Baal, that is Lord, and caused my people Israel to err, go astray. Now get this now, every word of it. I have also seen in the prophets of Jerusalem. They commit adultery, they walk in lies, they turn from Yahweh and follow the gods. This is being exposed now. Everything done in darkness is being brought to light now. They also strengthen the hands of evildoers. We will see that in the organizations here that we have now the information on, the organizations that rule throughout the earth called Masons, the Freemasonry, so that no one turns back from his wickedness. All of them are like Sodom. Did you get that? All of them are like Sodom. Why would he say this here? Why would he say they're all like Sodom? To me, and her inhabitants are like Gomorrah. Well, I was rushing. I didn't get to where I wanted, but I've got to stop the scripture there. But we will continue just a little bit now. The word Sadi, it means my secret counsel. Get that in your mind. My secret counsel. Now remember, in this verse that we just read, the priest of Jerusalem, and look at the last part of verse 14. From the prophets of Jerusalem. From the prophets of Jerusalem. Now, get this in your mind. Profaneness has gone out to all the land. Or all the earth, if you want to write it that way. That's what the word means. The word Sadi, it actually means my secret counsel. The word Sadi. The word sodomite. Sodomite. It means a religion. It means consecrated, devoted. It means they classify it as holy. Sodomite. They classify it as being holy, consecrated, devoted. The Sodomites were not inhabitants of Sodom. They were not just the inhabitants of Sodom. You can get this from any Bible dictionary. Just look up the word sodomite. They were not just the inhabitants of Sodom or the descendants, but men consecrated. They were consecrated to the unnatural vice of Sodom. That is pedophilia. As a religious rite. As a religious rite. I've got much more to cover right here, but I want to read you an article here. This was from Malachi Martin. Malachi Martin was a very well-educated man in the schools of higher learning. He was also a priest of the Catholic Church. Los Angeles, California. The contemporary state of apostasy, Martin writes, in the Catholic Church was acutely predicted by the renowned Jewish priest Malachi Martin in his 1996 book called Windswept House. Windswept House, that he wrote in 1996. A Vatican on page 492 of his book, Martin writes, suddenly it become unarguable that now during this papacy, the Roman Catholic organization carried a permanent presence of clerics who worshiped Satan and liked it, of bishops and priests, sodomized boys, of bishops. This was a group of bishops and priests who sodomized boys and each other. Also of nuns who performed the black rites, of Wicca, that's W-I-C-C-A if you want to look up her name, and who lived in lesbian relationships every day, including Sunday and holy days, acts of heresy and blasphemy and outrage and indifference were committed and permitted at holy altars by men who had been called to the priest. Sacrilegious actions and rites were not only performed on Christ's altar, he says, but had the convenience, or at least the tacit permission of certain cardinals, archbishops, and bishops. Malachi Martin wrote this 6 years ago, and today we are barely hearing in the news about Catholic priests being arrested and raping altar boys inside the confessionals, and about cardinals such as Boston's Law and Los Angeles, Mahoney, covering up the crimes. Received, Malachi Martin, a veteran insider, studied theology at Louvain, where he received doctorates in Semitic languages. You remember me covering this in the scriptures? These Semitic languages that was around in the different nations, carried there by this group, of course. Semitic languages, archaeology, or Oriental history. He also studied at Oxford and and the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and served as professor at the Vatican's Pontifical Biblical Institute. Malachi Martin had for a long time maintained that Satanists had infiltrated the Vatican. Just before his death, Martin said that soon after the installation of Pope Paul VI in 1963, that was 4 years before I was brought to Abelin, 1963, Vatican Satanists clandestinely, that's secretly, installed Lucifer in a secret ceremony called the enthronement of the fallen archangel Lucifer. The ceremony was conducted at the St. Paul's Chapel located within the Vatican. Pope Paul VI later wrote that the smoke of Satan has entered the sanctuary. Malachi Martin said that the incident of satanic pedophilia and its rights, they claim the gods gives them the rights to do this, including Wiki, its rights and practices was already documented among certain bishops and priests as widely dispersed as Turin in Italy and South Carolina in the United States. He emphasized the systematic organizational link of the network and had been established between certain clerical homosexual groups and Satanist covens and inordinate power and influence. It had inordinate power and influence, he said. Martin also said that the third secret of the Fatima concerned the apostasy of the Roman Catholic Church. He said that the essential message seems to be about Satanists lurking in the shadows, from the heart of the Vatican down to the local parishes, manipulating events. They are manipulating events, Satan is, and her demons, putting great effort to subvert the Roman Catholic Church. He said that these Satanists are in league with Zionists. You get that? With the Zionists. And what he called Universal Assembly, a Masonic group, that is Freemasonry, of Western plutocrats. That means one whose wealth is the source of control or influence, a government by the wealthy, a group of wealthy people who control the government, such as the Illuminati. This is all in his book, The Windswept House. I think that's as far as I can go. I'm out of time. This afternoon, we have, if we do have enough time, I'd like to bring you just a little bit more on this and show you, praise Yahweh, and to show you where we stand in this time period. Of course, you see a bunch of it already from the hidden codes, and of course what the great Kohan Nearya brought out at the articles. Don't forget those, and what he brought are the hidden codes, and Barack Obama, and of course the quartet and the four horses there of Revelation 6. Also in book 1, but Revelation 6, because all of these things are before us right now, and the next thing that's to take place, of course, is the nuclear war, which you could see from the articles. That's what they're playing with right now, is the nuclear bombs and getting them put into place where they can take certain nations out. If you remember my articles back years ago when I was bringing out also a book of Malachi Martin's called The Keys of This Blood, where they admit they are the Aaronic priesthood. You know, all of this together shows us who they are and what they have done over the years in turning against Yahweh and now coming down to this time period. Now, before, they've created government organizations such as CPS, to fight against those who they called heretics. So when somebody started talking about the Catholic Church or brought a claim against them, any claim, it made no difference. It made no difference if it was a rape or whatever that was for their priest. They sent these people out to talk to them, which quickly took them under arrest as heretics or witches or so forth. They just accused them of whatever. History says they could not testify for themselves. Only the testimony of the CPS that the Catholic Church invented was used against them. And they were burned at stakes. They were stoned. They were sawed asunder and so forth. Anyone who would talk against this group are prophets, brethren. They are part of those people that fought against what we're fighting against today. The same group. Praise Yahweh. But we're going to win. Believe it or not. This little group right here, Yahweh shows, is pecking away at this huge mountain of Satan, and it must be rather frustrating for them because, Yahweh says, hands off, you can't touch them. But now see, the shoe's on the other foot, and the organizations that they invented for their crusades is now coming against them for the same things that they were accusing others. But for thousands of years, they were able to hide this. And and there's no telling how many millions of children have been killed because they wouldn't submit to their evil lust. But now it's all being exposed, and they actually have records, the state does. It started off with a choir boy who ratted on a priest, and of course the state, the mother of this boy, had great pull in the state, so she organized the state police, and they actually wiretapped the phones of the Vatican. And now they're bringing them down. Babylon is fallen, is fallen. And the kingdom of Yahweh is growing like a big oak tree, slowly but surely growing, and will become the greatest government kingdom ever to be on the face of the earth and in heaven. And we're a part of it. The lowly Okies. And it don't cost you 2 cents to believe that 1 cent. I love you. Yahweh bless you.